Välkommen till PT-Podden. Podcasten för dig som vill lära dig mer om träning och hälsa. Mitt namn är Carl Gulla och jag är utbildningsansvarig för Sveriges största PT-utbildning, Intensiv PT.
If I have a small rock in my shoe, then after they would alert me to that. So that I actually find out, okay, this is uncomfortable.
Hej och välkommen till PT-Podden. Or should I say hello and welcome to PT-Podden? Because today's episode is in English. And that is because we have an internationally recognized lecturer with us. His name is Lars Avemarie, and he is a physiotherapist, a writer, a teacher, personal trainer, and as I mentioned, he is an internationally acclaimed lecturer. Now, what he does is he reconceptualizes pain according to current research, and he is very active in spreading knowledge in this area, and we are absolutely honored to have him as a guest on PT-Podden. I've spoken to Lars earlier, and I've listened to his lectures, and they completely changed the way I think regarding pain when I'm training my clients in an everyday life. Pain really is quite complicated, but Lars, he manages to break it down so that it's understandable, and he provides us with real-life knowledge on how to handle clients that have pain. Now, the reason this episode is in English is for two reasons. First, we think it can help personal trainers all over the world. And secondly, although Lars speaks very good, I'll call it Dane Swedish, I really don't. Now, I'd say that's enough talk. This conversation really helped me. I hope it will help you. Let's dive into the episode. Then I'll say good morning, Lars. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's a weekend, so that's always a good time.
I know, it's a weekend and it's actually sunny and beautiful, at least in Stockholm. How do you guys have it?
It's actually sunny here in Malmö also. Very sunny.
Yeah, it's a good day. We are sitting inside doing a podcast.
Yeah.
Well, that's life sometimes. So let's see, Can you begin? I know you know a lot about pain, but I'm not sure all of our guests know who you are. Can you give us a bit of an explanation? Who are you and what is it that you do?
Yeah, so basically I've worked full-time in the health industry since 2006. So soon I will have I will be coming up on 20 years. I've worked in many different roles. I worked as a fitness instructor, as a receptionist, as a gym class instructor, and also as a mid-level manager. And at my last job were as a self-employed personal trainer, specializing in people with pain and injuries. And this is actually before I went to university to get my bachelor's in physiotherapy. So that's my past. Currently, I work in regional rehabilitation as a physiotherapist full time. And then on the side, I teach a course that tries to reconceptualize and reimagine pain rehabilitation. So basically taking a lot of the research we know about pain and trying to apply it in a clinical setting.
And I know, so we're friends on Facebook now, which means I see how much you're posting every single day. And what I see is that you are extremely passionate about this. What led you to the interest in pain and pain research?
Yeah, so actually that comes back to what I talked about earlier or before. When I worked as a personal trainer or at the place where I were the personal trainer with most training experience. So that sort of found its way till that I got a lot of people with injuries or with pain or both, because I was the most experienced person in the gym. And then I had some colleagues who worked as gym class instructors and personal trainers who were also physiotherapists. And then I started to ask them for a lot of advice. Mm-hmm. And then actually my instructor or my teacher from my personal training education, he actually recommended me to apply for physiotherapy school. And these people that are working as personal trainers and gym class instructors and work physiotherapists, they started to recommend me to read a lot of research on pain. And for a long time, I just tried to be like a human sponge, tried to suck up every part of knowledge that I could learn from these colleagues. And then at some point, I had the realization that, let's backtrack a bit, that when I dealt with people with pain, they were often, at the same time they were training with me, they were also seeing a physiotherapist, which is a good thing. But at a point, I were quite dumbfounded because a lot of what the research said about pain and what the therapists said about pain were quite different. And then at some point, like 3 years into reading primarily research on pain, I found out, okay, the only thing that can explain the dichotomy that is between what the physiotherapists say and what the research say is that actually they don't know this new research on pain.
Sure. So, but why, why was it pain that became your main interest? Like, have you had pain and you thought that was interesting, or a family member or something like that?
So why pain? I've had being active and doing martial arts. Mm-hmm. I've had a lot of problems with pain, not the chronic nature, but pain is and were, particularly for me, like a part of training a lot. Mm-hmm. I did something like, when I did martial arts, I did something like 14 hours a week of martial arts.
That's a lot.
And of course that when you're doing that much, then at some point you will get injuries and get sprains and get problems. Mm-hmm. And that in combination with that, at least half of my patients or clients that I received as a personal trainer were having pain. Mm-hmm. And were doing physiotherapy, but many of those did not have the economic means to continue doing physiotherapy. So then they were recommended to go to a gym, and then they would meet me. So it's not something that I sort of chose to do, to be interested in, but I sort of circumstances put me onto this path.
Because it sounds like the interest sort of grew out of necessity. And this is what's interesting with personal training, which is that when you work as a personal trainer, you very often have injured clients. But I feel that as a personal trainer, you reflect a lot about the injury. Like, what could this be? Are they injured? Aren't they injured? But you don't really reflect about pain very often, which I find to be so... I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Just from the short sort of pre-interviews that we've had, I've sort of changed the way I think about this. So what did you do when you wanted to expand your understanding of pain? How did you learn more?
Yeah, so basically, I got in touch with these colleagues of mine that were physiotherapists, and that they started to recommend me scientific research on pain, different reviews and scientific papers. And the sort of the light bulb moment that came, like when I really realized this is way different than what I had believed about pain, were when I started to read two particular papers. There's a paper called Reconceptualizing Pain According to Modern Pain Science by one of the leading pain experts, Professor Lars Avemarie. And there are like 4 points in that paper. And I would say it's quite an introductory read, meaning it's quite easy. It's not that scientific, meaning that it's not that hard written, so you can read it. And that really changed my mind because it totally tipped over what I thought I knew about pain. And then Melzack, who's one of the pioneering researchers, pain researchers, he also did an overview article trying to like give a grand overview of it, and that also changed me a lot. And one thing I sort of found that this pain is not that simple that I used to believe. So basically, I used to believe that pain comes from an injury, or it's caused by locked joints, or weak or tight muscles, or ruptured discs, or poor posture, or poor core strength, or degenerative changes, basically discus prolapse and stuff like that. But this new research that I read really made me think that, well, this pain thing is not in any way that simple that I believed before. And that really sort of triggered my curiosity. Because if something that I thought I knew something about were not in a way that simple, what about the things that I am even more sure about? So that really sparked my curiosity.
I love the way you put that it sparks your curiosity. It's like, okay, I don't understand this. I want to, or it's maybe not the way I've perceived this to be. I need to learn more about this thing. I'm now curious about learning more about that. And I mean, I've been looking on your website with the different sort of summaries that you've made and stuff, and it is super interesting. It very quickly shatters your world. And I think we'll get into this in a little bit, but let's swap the focus now from your background then, and then swap it over to personal trainers. So what do we who work as personal trainers, probably most of us aren't physios as well, but we have the average clients. What do we need to know, according to you, about pain research?
Yeah, so actually, I think let's step back, not what we need to know, but actually why I think it's essential for personal trainers that they actually need to know about this stuff. Then we can talk about what they need to know afterwards. But the first point is that many people live with chronic pain. So basically, it's been estimated by there's a study with the Goldberg et al. That estimates that 20% of people currently in the world are living with chronic pain. So that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
So of course, it's highly likely that the personal trainers in their field will also meet these people. It's almost certain that they can't not meet these people. So that's one key point, that if you work as a personal trainer, it's highly likely that you will meet some of these 20%. And then some of the most debilitating diagnosis or conditions is actually low back pain. So Voss et al. Professor Voss did a study some years ago that was actually published in The Lancet about years lived with disability, meaning it's a disease that you don't necessarily die from, but it drastically reduces your physical capabilities, but also your quality of life. And on the top spot globally, low back pain is positioned. And on the fourth spot, it's neck pain. So neck pain, and particularly low back pain, is a global problem. So of course, that also means that most likely personal trainers will meet those people also. So I think it's quite essential that personal trainers need to know about pain.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's and it's one of these things where it's always tricky when a client comes and says, "Oh, my knee sort of hurts a little bit." It's like, "Oh, okay, let's go down this rabbit hole and see what happens and what they perceive of pain." And I've heard people speak about the biopsychosocial model of pain. Is that something that you can sort of dive into and explain what it is? Because I believe that should be relevant for this case.
Yeah. So the biopsychosocial model of pain is basically the current best explanation of what pain is, or particularly what pain is influenced by. But it's important to note that when talking about different models, pain models, other models for training or whatever, I always think about what George Butch, a famous British professor, said about models. He said, essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. Mm-hmm. Meaning that
I like that.
If we hone in on one particular area, then we also exclude a lot surrounding it. Meaning there's not, to my knowledge, one model, particularly in the pain field, that is all inclusive and that explains everything. So one way I look at the different pain models, and there are many different ones, is that they each explain and help us understand one particular aspect of the pain experience. But there's not one particular all-founding perfect model. That's actually, that's utopia. Mm-hmm. So coming back to the biopsychosocial model pain, the biopsychosocial model pain poses that pain is not only influenced by biological factors, but is also influenced by psychological and social factors, and that these factors also influence pain. So basically, pain is impacted by emotions, behavior, attention, our interactions with health professionals, and also interactions with our family members, and also our work environment. There were a big study done some years ago that found that actually the thing that impacted, that were the biggest risk factor for having low back pain were not good relationships with your coworkers.
All right.
So it's what was not lifting in particular. Lifting can also be a risk factor, but the risk factors that were strongest associated with low back pain were actually having working with a bunch of shitty people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but from reading about your website, and sort of like, this is a relatively, I'm not sure if new is the right way of thinking about it, but a lot of research is that the way people have been thinking about pain is, I've hurt myself, therefore I feel pain. And that's sort of what's being challenged now a little bit, that it can be, but you can also have pain without hurting yourself and so on.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, I did a article, quite popular. I was quite proud of Professor Peter O'Sullivan, one of the 10 leading back pain researchers. He actually shared my article, which sort of gave me the sum up for the value of the article and the information I tried to provide. But basically, I talk about in that article that there are 4 instances. So you can basically have pain and injury, and you can have no pain and no injury. Yeah. That's the normal assumed responses. So you have injury, that's because you have pain, or you have an injury. And then you can have no injury and no pain. But there's 2 other instances where that is also important, and we can link the article later. And that is, basically, you can have an injury and no pain, and you can have pain and no injury. And if we want to learn a lot about pain, those 2 last options can actually teach us a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Because a lot of the current research actually looks into that, and that sort of becomes an eye-opening point with what this pain thing is, because we now know that you can have a discus prolapse, and many people have, without any pain. You can have meniscus tears. You can have tears of the rotary cuff. You can even have fractures, like a vertebrae fracture, meaning like a fracture of the corpus vertebra in the spine. Those are often asymptomatic, meaning they don't give any symptoms. So that makes this simplistic view it debugs it quite effectively, because when you can have an injury, a known injury, so it's confirmed, but then you have no pain, that sort of doesn't, that can't be explained by a simplistic biomedical model.
Yeah, it's crazy. It just sort of changes the whole way you think about it as well. And I think in one of those articles you explain as well, in this, I believe I read on your site somewhere that, you know, things like sleep will affect or could affect the way you perceive pain. And I think that sort of translates when you have clients. I've had recently, which is interesting after we've spoken about this, clients who are, I'd like to phrase it as afraid of pain or like very aware of pain. Like, my shoulder hurts here. What could that be? And, you know, it's a random Tuesday. It's not, it's like, okay, did you do something? Did you fall? No. So, all right, you've got a kid at home, right? Yeah, he's 2. All right. Maybe not take it too seriously, but these type of things, it's like, have you slept well? No, I haven't slept well. Okay, well, that could sort of maybe be one reason that could explain it. They've got higher pain sensitivity. But I think the whole concept, right, is just that it's more complicated than we expect it to be.
Yeah. So I think we as humans, we want to find meaning in what happens.
Yeah.
So basically, if we bump our foot on a stool, or we drop our weight on our foot at the gym, then it hurts. And that's quite normal. And it has a clear external cause. It was the weight hit our foot, therefore it hurts. But when we are out running and then we get knee pain, but there's no obvious cause, then from my experience, many people start to internalize a cause. Well, of course, then there must be something wrong. And of course, because I can't see that anything is different in my knee, I can't see anything in the skin, then of course it must be something within the knee, inside the knee, that is injured.
Yeah.
And that can sort of create like a downward spiral. And in many cases, this doesn't really help us, because then we are like, in English, it's called ruminating. We are starting to like think much more on what can be happening and what is happening. And in some cases, then we go to our doctor, and our doctor sadly confirms that there's something wrong with our knee. But in many cases, when we actually make like our MRI, then we find a lot of problems. But we don't know if those problems actually were present before we had pain. So they did a study some years ago. This is just one example. There's a lot of these studies where they try to look at what can we find when we look into the body of a person, how many errors, if that really is errors, can we find. And there's a study where people had shoulder pain. So they did imaging of the shoulder with pain, but they also did imaging of the shoulder without pain. And compared to the findings, they couldn't find any difference in the two shoulders. So one shoulder had this amount of findings with symptoms, and the other shoulder had the same amount of findings without any pain.
Yeah.
And then that poses, again, a big problem with this. Well, then we can't explain the findings. That can't explain pain.
Yeah, and then that becomes complicated. And I think like you have these people as well, like just have different pain thresholds. I've got a client who I used to have who broke her toe during a competition that we had. And she didn't even, she didn't notice it until like 2 weeks later. And other people who are like, I bumped my knee into something, now I have a hernia in my back, so those type of ways of thinking. So if we have this whole way of thinking that's sort of changing regarding pain, and what it sounds like is that we shouldn't be as quick to associate pain with an injury, then that leaves us who works as personal trainers in a bit of a tricky situation of how we should handle this, right? Because then it's like, okay, well, maybe they're hurt, maybe they're not, but they have pain. So if somebody says this, like my knee's hurting, whatever type of thing, when should we change the exercise as personal trainers? When should we listen to them, and when should we sort of just keep pushing on?
Yeah. So like you alluded to earlier, first we need to recognize that pain is influenced by multiple factors. So it could be their knee pain or back pain or foot pain, could be due to factors like sleep, also stress, expectations, our beliefs, and so on. So there's a wealth of factors influencing. One of those factors is called nociception, which is basically receptors we have in the body, and we have them in almost all body tissue that alert us to potentially damaging stimuli. So basically, those are the receptors that if I have a small rock in my shoe, then after they alert me to that, to that I actually find out, okay, this is uncomfortable. This might even hurt. So that gets me motivated to actually take out the shoe and put out the tiny rock. But there's no injury in my foot from the little rock, but there's a potential for injury, meaning it alerts us before an actual injury happens. And anybody who had dealt with people with diabetes, who have problems with sensations in the lower limbs, then a tiny rock, if it's left unchallenged or unremoved, if we can call it that, that can actually dig a pretty big hole in your foot, in the bottom of your foot.
Sure.
So that can be quite serious, but in many cases, if we have a normally functioning body and system, we get a notification about this rock, and then we just remove it and nothing happens. And the same actually happens if we go to, if we take a hot shower. These receptors, that is called nociceptors, they actually alert us. They are sensitive and they actually get activated a little bit above body temperature. But injury happens a bit over that, meaning that we get a notification, if you can call it that, from you're standing in too hot water now. The water is too much above body temperature, that if you keep doing that for a while, then you will actually get a second-degree burn.
Yeah.
But the threshold is only a little bit above body temperature. However, the burning degree, which actually the stimuli you would need it to actually get burned from being in the shower is way above that. Which is good, because if it were the same, that would be a problem. Then you would be able to just stand in, basically cooking yourself. That wouldn't be good. But because the threshold is lower, you will get a sort of warning before you actually burn yourself.
And I mean, that's a great metaphor to sort of conceptualize how it works, or analogy maybe is a better word for it. But then with a client who's doing shoulder presses and they're saying, this is hurting my shoulder. Would we think like that? Like, okay, well, this is just your nociceptors saying, don't worry about it, just keep pushing. Or would you then say, all right, well, should we move the shoulder over here, see what that feels like? Like, how would you handle that situation with the client?
Yeah. So coming back to your question, from a pragmatic view or practical view, we can try first to change some of those factors. But of course, if we are with the patient or client, we can't just change how much they slept the last week.
No.
we can try to promote them sleeping more if we know that they have slept like shit for the past week.
Yeah, it would be fantastic if we could snap our fingers to fix that for them.
Yeah. So what I normally do, I try to modulate different things, influence different things. So what I do if I'm doing an exercise and that is sort of becoming a trigger, so people get pain from doing it, I normally my go-to modulators is I decrease range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes have an effect. If that doesn't have a desired effect, I decrease load or I decrease the rep range.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, instead of going to 15 repetitions and then the last reps they start to get shoulder pain, I would simply do 8 or 10.
Yeah.
If that doesn't have an effect, or that doesn't look like it could, it does it sufficiently, so they still feel discomfort or they still feel pain, then you could start to basically change exercise or play with the force vector. Meaning, instead of back squat, you could turn to a front squat.
Mm-hmm.
Or instead of, or maybe a scissor squat, where you're having the weight in your armpits.
Sure.
Or it could be with something like, if it were a deadlift, then you could go from a normal deadlift to a sumo deadlift. Or you could go to rack pulls. Mm-hmm. So basically the weight is now coming from behind. So it changes the force vector. And that can also sometimes have an effect. Mm-hmm. But normally one of the first ones, that has an effect. So that actually, what could we say? It actually, it removes the trigger.
So it sounds like you handle it the same way I think most personal trainers with common sense will handle it. Like they'll change something. We don't just say continue and actually increase the load. We're not trying to provoke it. Instead, you do an adaptation, you try around. The difference between maybe you and a different personal trainer is that you really are comfortable doing this, that you know more like what it could be about.
But also what I think is if I go back 20 years where I didn't learn or know a lot of this stuff, I would think that they, in some cases, were doing the movement wrong. Mm-hmm. So I would started to think, okay, they're doing the movement wrong. That's why it causes pain. Mm-hmm. And we know that we can't say that anymore. There's basically, we move differently, everybody. So there's no one perfect way of moving. Of course, there are more optimal ways and less optimal ways, but there's actually an absence of data supporting that one way of moving is better for pain than others. Mm-hmm. Because that hones in of this idea that we all move the same. And the data we have is that we don't move the same way. Mm-hmm. Even elite weightlifters, some of the best people in the world, they move differently. And they even move differently within reps.
Yeah.
Meaning you can have, it's a bit like if we take a squat, then there is very little what is called endpoint variability, meaning that they always get to the top position of the squat. But there's a lot of variability to how they get to the endpoint.
Yeah.
And that's even in some of the best people in the world doing squat. They do movements differently. And the same happens when we see something like body posture. Body posture is highly variable. Even just standing is also highly variable. So basically, if I do this in my course, I get people to stand up, and then I get them to sit down, and then I get them to stand up. Those 2 repetitions are not the same.
Yeah.
So that there's a huge array of variability within people. but there's also variability within the person himself, meaning how he does a move, like a squat, is different from how he did it 5 minutes ago.
I love that, because I've got a background in CrossFit where, the CrossFit level 1 is like the cues. It's like everybody stands shoulder width apart, everybody, chest up, everybody knees out, everybody the same. And it has to be, right? Because it's group training in that sense. Like they have to standardize it. But that there for me was one of these learnings where it's like, okay, you can't actually just use these universal cues for everybody. You really have to start looking at the individual. So I love that sort of that way of phrasing it, that everybody moves a bit differently. So just because somebody's got pain doesn't necessarily mean they're doing the movement wrong. You can still change something, but
I like the saying, one size fits none.
Yeah.
And that's really a key insight into human movement. Even if we go a little bit deeper on posture, there's actually so much variation within posture, how we carry ourselves, that we can't even make normal values. We can't actually say, and that's the researchers themselves saying that. There's so much variability, so we are so different in how we carry our posture that we can't actually say what normal is.
Yeah. So if we have sort of this situation where everything's a bit hard to measure and everything's a bit different, with which clients, like when should we just keep going, even if they have issues? And also on the other end, when should we stop? Like when would you say, okay, pause, now we need to stop this and chat about the pain that you're feeling? And when would you just keep going?
Yeah, so basically I would never suggest that we just keep going. I would try to change something like I talked about earlier, see if we can influence or we can get this trigger or flare up to go away.
So you don't just continue doing shoulder presses in that position, saying hopefully you'll stop feeling pain after a while.
Yeah, no, I will change something. And then there's of course a notion between, is it discomfort or pain?
Sure.
And that's it's like a gradient scale. But when you have exercised for some time, you get, and I don't know about you, but I think I got better at, okay, this is discomfort, but that's actually the act of exercising. Contra, this is pain.
Yeah, definitely.
So discomfort is good, but pain, that's something different. And I view it that way. But sometimes people who are not well trained or are not gym rats or weekend warriors, they actually don't make that distinction. So I would never just keep going. And there's actually a risk of keep going also. So basically, if I try to influence and try to modulate the trigger and it keeps going, then I would take a step back and try to let the system unwind. Basically, okay, so we try to do different types of shoulder exercises. We try to do it with a band. We try to do it with weight. We try to do it with cables, but nothing. It still creates. You still have problems. Then I would like step back. Okay, let's switch over. Now we're going to do another exercise. Also, because there's a risk of just continuing, and that goes a bit into my teaching in physiotherapy. So there's a fundamental law in neurology that's called Herb's law. And the law states that neurons that fire together wire together. That actually means, translated, that means that if you run a particular neural circuit that you have in your brain, so basically when we're exercising, we're not only training our muscles, basically our muscles can't move without the nervous system. So we are also actually training our nervous system. But if we have a movement that is associated with pain, meaning when we do that movement, we get pain. If we do that movement and we have pain, that association actually becomes stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So, and actually we don't want to that association to be stronger.
Yeah.
We want the association to be weaker. We actually want to disassociate it. So basically, if you're running, and this running, every time you run, you have knee pain, then of course that association becomes stronger. And there's a more layman's terms of this. That's called practice makes perfect. So basically, if you want to get good at playing violin, you have to play violin. The other side is the reversed, meaning that, okay, practice makes perfect, but the other side of that coin is the saying, use it or lose it.
Yeah.
So basically, if you get better at if you do it, you get better at doing it. But if you don't do it, you get worse. So basically, with pain, we want to sort of disattach it. So we should never just keep going. And this is sort of, it's supported by research on what is called central sensitization. So central sensitization it is basically increased sensitivity to this nociceptive stimuli, what is called noxious stimuli. So let's try just to explain that, unpack it. So basically, noxious stimuli is stimuli that happens when these receptors, that is called nociceptors, are activated.
Mm-hmm.
And like I told you earlier with the shower, they deal with potentially harmful stimuli. So basically, they get activated when you have this tiny rock in our shoe. So basically, they are a bit like a warning system. And they have also been coined as being our first line of defense, meaning if we are to protect ourselves from hurtful stimuli, then we need to know about it. And that's actually the function of them. Gregory Lehman, a well-known researcher, spine researcher and chiropractor, he says nociceptors, they are a bit like security at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
So they will be triggered or send an alarm if it's a gun you're going through security with, or your keys.
Yeah.
So they are quite what could you call trigger happy, but of course they are trying to warn us. So they also not only warn us, but they can also in some instances actually decrease the level of injury we get. So basically, if I put the hand on my stove that is hot, then there's something called the nociceptive withdrawal reflex, which means it works on spinal level, which means that even before I sense I have pain, I actually withdrew my hand.
Yeah.
And that's actually not only, it decreases the amount of injury that I have. So basically, if I put my hand on my stove and I just didn't feel anything and I started to smell, it smells like bacon. And then I look down and then I see my hand is basically toasting.
Yeah.
Then of course I would sustain a quite big injury. But because this alarm system is so sensitive and highly tuned, then I actually withdraw the hand even before I notice that I actually put my hand on something hot.
And then how does this translate to our role as personal trainers? And then bear in mind that the personal trainers are, probably not physiotherapists and have that type of background.
Yeah. So basically you could say that the one key point I would think more important for personal trainers would be to know that, okay, pain is not that simple. Pain is actually due to a lot of things. It might not only be how we do the movement, but it could be how much, it could be sleep, it could be different things. Mm-hmm. Two, it also recognizes that this notion that we have something that happens in the body that's called central sensitization. It opens our eyes to that pain could actually be due to within changes in the nervous system. So it's not external, it's internal. And one of the key points of this thing that we think happens in the body, that's called central sensitization, is basically two things that we see in the clinic or in the gym. It's basically called aldynia and hyperalgesia. And those are basic terms or fancy words for what hurts before hurts even more now, and what didn't hurt before hurts now. So basically, before I could do 10 squats, then it started to hurt. Now I do 10 squats, it hurts a lot. And it could be, well, now I actually can't even get up from my chair, then it hurts. And that is basically what we could see, both as physiotherapists, but also as personal trainers. And that could be an indication of these within changes within the nervous system. So basically, in many cases, when pain persists, due to this neural associations becoming stronger, and our idea about why this neural sensitivity increases is this thing called central sensitization. That basically explains why in some cases pain increases, and these increases are mainly due to within changes in our nervous system. And an easy explanation that is commonly used is basically if you go into the theater during the day, you sit in a dark room. By sitting in a dark room, you actually get sensitized towards light. Mm-hmm. That's why when you get out of the theater, the movie theater, then of course you experience the light as being very, very bright. And you have to close your eyes a lot.
Yeah.
And that's basically sensitization. Or you having, basically you could also say tight shoes on that presses in certain points. And after a while, you get sensitive to those points. That's then peripheral sensitization. Basically, it's sensitization within the limbs. Externally, not the central nervous system. And actually this sensitization happens, it's a part of everyday life. If you get like a cut, then you get the wound gets inflamed, and then you get increased sensitivity to touching the wound, but actually also touching around the wound. So it's not only the wound itself that is hurting, but actually also the area around, because it's inflamed. And that's one of the things that inflammation does. It decreases the sensitivity.
And so what does that mean for obligation as a personal trainer? Like, should we know this? Do we have to know this? Should we deal with clients and learn more about this? Or should we just refer clients away straight away?
So basically, if pain were not that common, then you could argue that this were not so important to know. And I don't think personal trainers should play physiotherapists. Mm-hmm. No, they should not. But it would be good to know, because the deal is people working as personal trainers will see people with pain.
Yeah.
And then instead of thinking that they're doing the movement wrong, or scaring the person, thinking that it's something they're doing wrong, or actually stopping to train them, which also would be wrong. You know, one of the best things we can do for ourselves, and in this case our clients, is to be active. And that's like a huge role of the personal trainer, and where I actually see the personal trainer having an even more important role than physiotherapists.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that personal trainers know about this. Then when pain persists, then of course we should refer out. So if people have pain and they have pain for a long time, and if it has no obvious trigger.
Mm-hmm.
So, like doing gardening for 2-3 hours, and you're not used to it.
Yeah,
that could be a trigger. Or you have a client, they did like did a deal with a colleague, and they're going to run the Stockholm Marathon.
Yeah.
And then they haven't been running for 10 years. Then they put on their running shoes, and then they start to run, and then they get knee pain.
Yeah.
That's a normal part of life. That's just living, and that can't be avoided. But it's nothing dangerous. We also need to recognize that. But that's just part of living. Or like you helped a friend move their heavy couch, so it's an uncommon movement, and maybe you couldn't lift it in the way you were used to, so you had to lift it in some awkward position. That could also be a trigger. Mm-hmm. So that's normal. That's just part of living, and that's nothing to be afraid of. But when pain persists and it has no obvious trigger, then we should refer out to a doctor, preferably, I would argue. But that doesn't mean they should stop doing any activity.
Yeah. So I find this to be such a fun conversation because I'm learning stuff, and I'm pretty sure everybody listening is learning stuff as well. If people want to continue learning more, how can people find you and sort of see what you're doing? Because as I said in the beginning, you're so passionate about this, and it's really fun to read and watch everything that you do. So where can people find you?
Yeah, so they can basically hook up with me on Facebook. Basically follow me on Facebook, like you talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. I post a lot on Facebook.
A lot.
And that's not only about pain, it's about fitness, it's about strength training. So it's a bit like I have a passion both for physiotherapy, but I have not forgot my background in personal training. So I have a passion for evidence-based personal training also. And then, of course, they can go to my website, larsavemarie.com. I have a lot of free content. I think I have done something like 10 or 12 other podcasts.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. If you can basically listen so much to my voice that you will fall asleep, most likely.
Yeah, so we'll link all of that in the show notes, of course. Your websites, people
like,
can find
something
it.
Like I think it's up to now. I think we have something like 12 hours of me talking.
Wow.
With podcasts like this.
But this was the best one, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
this
sure.
was the best one. Yeah. Particularly towards personal trainers. And then, of course, I have my weekend course that I teach around mostly Europe, but I did San Diego earlier this year, and I'm going to Phoenix later this year. So, but there is a lot of more of this content, and it's I wouldn't say dumbed down, but I have tried to simplify the material as much as possible, so it's understandable for basically everybody. It's geared towards health professionals, meaning physiotherapists, chiropractors, naprapaths, occupational therapists, and of course also personal trainers.
Yeah, for sure. And it is, like, I can testify that it's manageable to read, which is quite nice, because something as complex as this can be very daunting to start researching and learning more. So it's definitely a good first step. So follow you on Facebook and go to your website, and I'll link both of these in the show notes so it's easy to find.
Okay.
Lars, thank you so much for being part of this and explaining your thoughts and experiences. I look forward to doing another episode in 5 or 10 years, and then maybe you can explain what you've learned in those times.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invite.
Yeah, awesome.